Your Royal Holiness, thank you once again for gathering us together. And as the Archbishop of New Orleans, it is my honor to greet and to welcome all of you to this Symposium of the Great Mississippi River Restoring Balance. It is an honor for us to be here and to exchange these ideas as we move forward in respecting and reverencing the great gift of creation and the environment that God has given to us. I will chair this first plenary session, which is entitled The Interconnectedness of All Things. The biographical information of all of our speakers is contained in the booklet that you received. And so in order to keep the program moving, we will not repeat that information, but ask you to refer to the booklet. First of all, we would like to welcome and thank Mrs. Jackie Clarkson, who is a member of the New Orleans City Council. We're very happy that you are with us today, and I would turn to you, Mrs. Clarkson, to say a few words of welcome in the name of our city.
Thank you, Archbishop. Good morning. Thank you. All Holiness, Patriarch, thank you again for gathering all of us together. Most importantly, welcome to New Orleans. Welcome to all of you from around the world, to the city that has experienced America's greatest natural and unnatural disaster. A city that, like the mighty Mississippi, is restoring balance. A city that has resilience second to none. As we stood at ground zero for Hurricane Katrina and watched 80% of our city go underwater, as we watched our first responders save 20,000 lives, our police, our fire, and our EMS, whom should always be in all of your prayers and thoughts, as we watched the greatest city of multicultural love and virtue slowly slipping away, we knew, and as I said on national television, we knew without a doubt we would sustain. We knew we would rebuild. And as I said to one international correspondent, what do you mean will we rebuild? It's only a matter of how long it'll take us. 80% of this city may be underwater, but the spirit of the people of New Orleans will never be, is never, and to be never underwater. And like the mighty Mississippi, we have continued with that surge and that resilience and that bordering of disaster to try to restore the balance of our lives. And we welcome this international symposium to our humble city because it parallels what we have to do together. We now bring another chapter to the world's history of restoring balance, to the world's history of taming the shrews like the mighty Mississippi and the hurricanes of tomorrow. We too can now play a role in contributing to what has to be recognized as mighty forces that we deal with in a preventive and a curative measure, as well as allowing for the fact that people have lives and people's lives go on and people still continue to believe. They believe in where they came from and what they belong to. And as you combine this science and religion, you make that possible and you make that notable. And the awareness brings everyone to the table that we all have something to contribute and we all have something to learn. We are most grateful for this opportunity and thank you for letting us be a small, humble part of it. And on behalf of the city of New Orleans, that is 80% rebuilt now, we say, whereas the city of New Orleans is renowned for its food, festivals, famous citizens, and foreign visitors, and whereas we take great pride in paying tribute to events and activities, now we proclaim His All Holiness, Ecumenical, Patriarch Bartholomew, welcome to New Orleans. Congratulations on your leadership in this world, and thank you for engracing us with your presence here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Clarkson, for representing our mayor and city council and for your warm words of welcome to His All Holiness and to all of us participating in the symposium. Thank you for being with us this morning. We now turn to our first speaker, Mr. John Barry, and he's an author, and he will discuss with us this morning what happened to New Orleans threatens every coastal area in the world. Please join me in welcoming John Barry.
Thank you. First, again, I want to welcome everyone, particularly Your All Holiness. I want to thank you very much for your earlier remarks, which I think were extremely apt and quite deep. There's already, included, particularly in your remarks, talked about the pollution. I want to talk about flooding. And the situation that faced New Orleans, I mean, New Orleans is the point of the spear. You know, what happened in New Orleans will, with sea level rise and increased storm intensity, obviously threaten every coastal city in the world, and more than half of the world's population lives within coastal zones. And so far, it will be a model for the rest of the world, what we do forward. It will either be a model to emulate or it will be a model to avoid. In either event, people are watching very closely internationally. So far, the United States has failed the test, and I want to show you what the rest of the world has done on this. If we could start the slides, please. This is the storm surge barrier that protects Holland. This is a storm surge barrier that protects London. Wrong way. There's always a technical problem. Okay, there we go. Can we, you know, I usually don't do any PowerPoint slides. This is why. Can we advance? It will work now? Doesn't work. You know, I've given about 4 PowerPoint presentations in my life, and this is why. And we did run through this prior to coming out. Okay, London. Well, that's, okay, London. This is Nagoya, Japan. This is in the United States. This is actually in where I grew up, Providence, Rhode Island. This is a hurricane barrier in Providence, Rhode Island, which is not known for being threatened by hurricanes, but indeed it was flooded in 1938 and 1954. This was constructed after the 1954 hurricane, when the United States was investing in infrastructure and building interstate highways. That is a storm surge barrier in New Orleans. That is the London Avenue Canal. That was designed in the 1980s under the Reagan administration, when we did not think the government could do anything right, and they proved it. And it was constructed, that was finished in 1999. And this, of course, is another part in action during the storm. Obviously, again, that's a statement of what society values, what kind of investment it's willing to put into infrastructure at a different point in its period. But the reality is, New Orleans is not naturally vulnerable to hurricanes. The reason it has become so vulnerable is because we have lost 2,300 square miles of land. that is equivalent to the state of Delaware. It's bigger than the state of Delaware. If you wrap the state of Delaware around New Orleans would not need any levees whatsoever. That land would provide plenty of buffer. And this is the Mississippi River system. What you may not be aware of, in fact, you're probably not aware of, the river built all the land from roughly down there to the sea. 34,000 square miles in 7 states in the floodplain, and roughly another 5,000 or 6,000 square miles that coastal currents built land from the mouth of the river, carrying sediment from the mouth of the river below us all the way to the Texas border. So in total, close to 40,000 square miles were built by the deposit of sediment from the Mississippi River. This is obviously an enormous amount of land. Right now, however, the Mississippi River, all rivers are integrated systems. And the title Interconnectedness of All Things is particularly apt to this subject. There are approximately 40,000 dams on the entire Mississippi River system. All of them in some way damage this area down here, but there are actually, we now have only 30 to 40% of the amount of sediment that used to be in the Mississippi River is now in the Mississippi River. And the loss of that sediment has been a significant element in the erosion of coastal land. As I said, there are roughly 40,000 dams, which seems like a nearly infinite amount in terms of trying to do something about it. But there are actually only 6 dams in Montana, which is up around here, North Dakota and South Dakota, in this area, in the upper Missouri River. 6 dams that were built to produce electricity in that part of the United States that are responsible for withholding 1/2 of all the sediment that is missing from the Mississippi River is now lying in reservoirs behind those 6 dams. And they're enormous reservoirs. Their coastline is longer than the coastline of the state of California. Wrong way. This is the New Orleans metropolitan area. And, you know, when we go through the other elements that, and the red is you know, basically the area of the land that has been lost. When we go through the various reasons for the loss of the land, I've just mentioned the sediment that is no longer in the river. Another issue is we currently have, for the shipping industry, we have jetties at the mouth of the river that extend 2.5 miles out into the Gulf of Mexico. Most of the sediment that remains in the river is carried by these jetties that were built for the shipping industry. They're carried out into deep water in the Gulf of Mexico. So that sediment is no longer available to rebuilding the coast. Another major problem in terms of loss of land, which is what has endangered the city, is levees. The levees, of course, do protect the population down here from flooding. But if you look at the area of the most red, where most of the land has been lost, those levees in that area of the river do not protect anybody. No one lives there. I don't mean that area is lightly populated. I mean nobody lives there. Those levees, like the jetties, are there to protect navigation, international and interstate commerce. And this loss of sediment, the loss of the ability to rebuild the coastline, has created a long-term problem for us that is somewhat akin to taking a big block of ice out of a freezer and putting it in the sink, and the ice begins to melt. It is a problem. You need that ice, and you can see the ice go away, but it is a slow problem that you would have normally time to address as soon as you recognize it. But in addition to all this other activity, we have dredged 10,000 miles of canals and pipelines through our coastal areas, and every inch of those 10,000 miles has brought saltwater intrusion and greatly accelerated the loss of land. So the analogy I used a moment ago of a block of ice in a sink, these canals are just as if you take an ice pick and start pounding at the ice and cracking it up. So they've greatly accelerated the loss of land, greatly accelerated the situation that we have to deal with. And in addition to, there are also, through here, there are other waterways, particularly the Gulf Intracoastal Waterway, which is an entirely man-made navigation channel. It was actually built prior to World War II to protect shipping from German submarines, which were anticipated to operate in the Gulf and did operate in the Gulf. And the GIWW has been a major source of saltwater intrusion as well. You combine all these things and you put New Orleans and South Louisiana in the situation that we now present. All of them are man-made problems. And there is sort of no better example of what this has wrought, what man has wrought, humans, men and women, than New Orleans East, the Lower Ninth Ward, which is internationally known, and St. Bernard Parish. Those areas, part of that area was flooded by a storm surge coming right out of the Gulf. But much of those areas, where in total about 180,000 people lived, and almost all of their homes, all of them, were destroyed, the overwhelming majority of those homes. A lot of that area would have been dry, completely dry, seen no water, had it only been storm surge. But the Gulf Intracoastal Waterways, levees, flood walls, similar to the flood walls that I showed you a minute ago, flood walls broke on the GIWW and on the Industrial Canal, man-made navigation channels, and yet internationally and nationally people are wondering why those who live there, why should they go back? They're victims, essentially, of the shipping industry. And I'm not against the shipping industry. We exist. New Orleans is where it is because of the shipping industry, because of navigation interests and international economic issues. I only have a few minutes, so the last point I want to make, I guess, is that there actually is some positive news on this. I think compared to many areas in the world facing rising sea level, New Orleans actually has some reason to hope. And that is because the coastal marsh is alive. It's a living thing. And living things within limits can adapt. And there is science that demonstrates that if the coastal marsh gets sediment and fresh water, it will adapt to rising sea level and grow and may be able to keep pace with it. In fact, just yesterday I learned of some new information that suggests the coastal marsh can rise a half an inch a year. And that is actually easily fast enough to stay ahead of sea level. How good that science is, how definitive it is, I don't know, but it's obviously good news. So on that, I thank you, and whatever's next, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Berry, for a very informative presentation, and the PowerPoint did work and did help us to see in a more vivid way what you were saying. Thank you very much. Great information. Our next presentation this morning will be done by Mr. Hylton Murray-Philipson, the director of the Wingate Ventures, and his presentation is entitled Turning Points and Tipping Points.
Thank you very much. Your Royal Holiness, Eminences, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, we live in extraordinary times. The ice caps are retreating, sea levels are rising, as water tables are falling on land. Extinctions in the natural world are occurring at up to 1,000 times their natural rate. The seas and oceans are overfished and overpolluted. The impact of man is everywhere. And yet, it is still a wonderful world. If we are to save it, or more to the point, if we are to save ourselves, we need to have a profound reality check, to ask ourselves where we are heading and to learn to live within limits. If business as usual is going to end in tears, then business is going to have to change. But it will not be business alone that changes. Every part of society will need to embrace a revolution in the way that we lead our lives, in the way that we relate to each other, and in the way we treat the natural world. Although that sounds alarming, it is also the most exciting opportunity of all time. The search for balance is the search for Eden, the search to make ourselves whole. Turning points are moments of change determined by humanity, but tipping points are imposed on man by the natural world. Change is coming, of that there is no doubt, but will it come through turning points or through tipping points? What sort of people are we? Are we prepared to spend 1 or 2% of GNP today to avoid mid-century calamity? Or is that too high a price to pay in a world driven by immediate consumption and quarterly earnings? The United Nations meeting in Copenhagen in 3 weeks' time is suffering from a crisis of expectation, but it may at least begin to give answers to these questions. Only 2 days ago, the United States and Britain both confirmed there is no plan B. It is time to drop the fantasy that perpetual economic growth is possible within a fundamentally limited system. Can we not learn from the cod fisheries of the Outer Banks? Can we not see from Katrina, Rita, Wilma and Stan, and the simultaneous drought in the Amazon, that we need to save rainforests? Or do we have to wait for hurricanes to hit New York instead of New Orleans, for floods to breach the Thames barrier rather than drown Cotswold villages? Can we turn before we're tipped? We will only save the ecosystems on which we depend if we change the way we think, if we aspire to something bigger and better than mere consumption, if we can find balance between man and nature through respecting limits, rendering unto God what is God's, and unto Caesar what is Caesar's, combining the tree of life with the tree of knowledge. As your Royal Holiness has observed, we often refer to an environmental crisis, but the real crisis lies not in the environment, but in the human heart. The human capacity to alter course is well documented. Constantine adopting Christianity, the rise of democracy, the collapse of communism, all these are turning points, examples of how societies changed gear, collectively seeking a better way of life. For centuries, man has struggled to escape from hunger, poverty, and disease. Our transforming power is extraordinary. It can turn mudflats into Venice, but it can also turn forests into deserts. Today, as never before, our individual well-being needs to be considered in the context of the collective good. Perhaps we should follow Bhutan, where the government measures gross national happiness instead of gross national product, factoring in both spiritual and environmental well-being. Why should it strike us as weird when a government pursues the happiness of its citizens? That shows how lost we have become. It has been fascinating to witness Goldman Sachs's return to prosperity. On the one hand, it represents relief that the economy is coming off the life support machine. On the other hand, the disconnect between Wall Street and Main Street is troubling. Can it be right for one firm to set aside $17 billion in bonuses when unemployment is still so high and millions of people have yet to recover from the slump in housing values, which was itself created by unsustainable banking practices in the first place. Like John having nothing against shipping, I certainly have nothing against Goldman Sachs. They are merely more successful than others. But I genuinely wonder if the model as a whole is fit for purpose, whether this is wealth worth having, whether in going back to business as usual, we have missed the chance of a lifetime to do things differently. The disconnect is not just between Wall Street and Main Street. It is between the global economy and the global environment. $17 billion is about half the amount required to halt the destruction of tropical forests, the best means we have of buying time. Whilst individuals collect billions in bonuses, the forest shrinks by 15 American football pitches every minute. Arithmetically, climatically, morally, it can't go on. In the biblical flood, it is interesting to note that when trouble loomed, Noah did not gather all his friends together and set off in the ark. No. He called all the animals of the earth to join him, 2 by 2, acknowledging the interdependence of all creatures in the web of life. How sad to think, as Thomas Berry said, that if the animals of the earth now had the vote, we'd be asked to leave the ship. Our collective impact on the planet is crowding out other forms of life, but there is no reason why we cannot change course, take a new turning, and decide to do things differently. This is not as alien as it might seem. For safety and the common good, we limit the speed at which we drive our cars. Limits on carbon emissions are just the same. The concerns are safety and the common good. Of course, turning points in human history are mere tweaks in the narrative compared to tipping points in the natural world. The extinction of the dinosaurs, the movement of continents, the coming and going of ice ages. But the impact of man on the natural world is now so great that we can, through our own actions, either provoke or prevent some of the tipping points in nature. The collapse of cod stocks in the North Atlantic was not inevitable. The loss of half the forests in the world in the last 50 years was not preordained. These losses occurred because of a lack of respect for limits and a lack of value attributed to the natural order in the architecture of international finance and development. Mankind has inflicted more change on the planet in the last 50 years than in all the rest of previous human history. Our instincts are no longer harnessed to horse and plough or bow and arrow, but to nuclear power and all the manifestations of our technological age. We have felled forests, drained marshes, dammed rivers, bent nature to our will as never before. But we've reached the point in our human story when the pursuit of short-term economic growth, regardless of long-term environmental cost, is testing the physical limits of the planet. That is why this moment, this year, next month, is unique. Copenhagen has been described as the most important meeting in history. Change is coming, whether we plan it or not. The limit to our current way of life is often expressed in the need to stay within 450 parts per million of atmospheric CO2 in order to prevent climate change becoming runaway or unstoppable. In my own lifetime, we've gone from 310 to 390 parts per million, an increase of 80, and we only have 60 more to go. At current rates of increase, we have less than 20 years before we pass the point of no return. But even if we weren't faced by global warming, we would need to learn to live within environmental limits anyway. Putting CO2 aside, if China continues to grow at 8% per annum, she will surpass the economic output per capita of the United States in 20 years' time. On current patterns of consumption, China would then consume 2/3 of the world's wheat harvest and would need twice the current global supply of paper. There go the rest of the forests. We have moved from the age of discovery to the age of consequences. As a species, we have to voluntarily accept limits in our own lives for the sake of generations to come. However appalling the Black Death, however incalculable the suffering of World War I may have been, The future of the human race itself was not in doubt. But today, through greed and ignorance, we are sawing off the branch on which we all are sitting. The world's population has more than quadrupled in only a century. Over half of humanity now live in cities, living under the false impression that mankind has somehow transcended the natural world, is no longer part of it or dependent on it. One might almost say, no longer belongs. Yet however much we're in denial, we do belong. There is nowhere else to go. Just 2 weeks ago, the Archbishop of Canterbury spoke of the urgent need to reconnect with the natural world as a means of reconnecting with a fuller concept of life itself. Seen in the right light, a walk in the rain could become a transformational experience. There are many parallels between the banking crisis and the environmental crisis. It is all about what we value, how we assess risk, and the need to adopt precautionary principles. So far, upheavals in financial markets have not led to a general rethink of the global business plan. Indeed, one characteristic of the current model is the assumption that growth can be limitless, so there is no need for a business plan at all. It assumes that the Creator has given us a blank check to do what we like. I am not anti-market. Indeed, I am criticized in some quarters for trying to bring market forces to the cause of conservation. But in some ways, Wall Street's comeback in the last 6 months is unfortunate, as it has allowed policymakers off the hook in terms of doing a fundamental reappraisal of where we're heading. The crisis did illustrate the potential for coordinated action in the face of a threat to the system, with stimulus packages being launched across the world. But the opportunity to build a green economy on the back of these investments was largely lost. South Korea spent 81% of its stimulus package on green measures, compared to only 12% in the United States and 7% in the UK. The facts are out there in the work of the IPCC, the Stern Report, and many other studies. So why has the response been so half-hearted? A pessimist would say that democracy itself is unsuited to dealing with these issues. An optimist might say that our leaders are keeping their cards close to their chests before the Copenhagen talks begin. Time will tell. We need to cultivate a sense of stewardship for creation, as well as a sense of intergenerational responsibility. We are merely cogs in the wheel of time, links in the chain of life, trustees for the future. Not only do we have a duty to each other and to all life on different branches of the family tree, but we have a duty to pass the earth to the next generation in a viable condition. That is the most sacred trust of all. We must learn to use the bounty of the earth for our own benefit, without prejudicing the interests of those to come. If our ignorance and greed prevents us from doing this, we will have the blood of billions on our hands. We all know about firms' need to go carbon neutral. Ultimately, if we are to have truly sustainable development, we will have to be natural capital neutral as well. By definition, if we are not natural capital neutral, we are not living on income, but consuming capital. The World Wildlife Fund's recent Living Planet report shows how we have become ecological debtors, propping up our lifestyles by drawing and overdrawing on ecological capital in other parts of the world. It's just like subprime. You know that a correction is coming. 2 years ago, after the Amazon Symposium, I set up Canopy Capital to invest in the ecosystem services of the tropical forest to help accelerate change in the relationship between man and nature. I believe that the world will come to its senses and recognize the cost-effectiveness of the forest acting as a carbon sink at 10 cents a ton compared to $1,000 a ton for the industrial equivalent. As living carbon brings immense co-benefits in terms of water and biodiversity, I'm banking on mankind choosing life over death. There are three main sources of emissions that are outside the Kyoto Protocol that need to be brought into the framework: the United States, China, and the burning of tropical forests, each responsible for around 20% of the global total. Kyoto aimed to reduce the emissions of the developed world by 5.4%. Targets now adopted by the European Union include reductions of 20% by 2020, only 10 years away, and 80% by 2050. Ladies and gentlemen, the scale of the challenge is unprecedented outside of wartime. The mountain will be steep. But if we are to avoid a tipping point, our turning point is now. Let us live in hope, remembering that during the Cold War, the United States spent up to 10% of GNP defending the West against the threat of communism, and we only need 1 or 2% today to combat climate change. This is all so doable, so affordable, and it would vastly increase the sum of human happiness. Imagine for a moment indigenous people who believe that the Creator has given them everything they need for survival in the forest or on the ice. They have no individual wealth. Everything is done in the name of the community. They respect the spirits of the animals they hunt even as they eat them. In other words, they have learnt to live sustainably within the environment in which they find themselves. I'm not suggesting a rerun of communist experiments that so obviously failed in the last century. But imagine for a moment that we all had limits imposed on our carbon footprints in order to meet those challenging targets I just explained. It would imply dramatic change, but it wouldn't all be bad. Parents might have more time to spend with each other and with their children. Rush hour traffic would become a distant memory. The air would be easier to breathe. We would regain control of our lives. Our net worth might be less in the language of accountants, but we would have reconnected with the rhythms of life and maybe rediscovered our souls in the process. I can hear the knock on the door of the Garden of Eden. This could be a price worth paying. However utopian that may sound, it is vital to see that the coming change is going to be exciting and uplifting. It could liberate us from being mere numbers on corporate balance sheets, induced by ever more seductive advertising campaigns, to run ever faster, to consume ever more. As His Holiness the Pope said in the recent encyclical, this moment is a God-given chance to be more, not just to have more. How bad does it have to get before we accept that a tipping point is being reached and take preventative action to avoid it? The evidence is in, and the jury's out. To date, the immediate needs of today are still outweighing the consequences for our children tomorrow. But every threat is an opportunity. If we can change within, we can certainly change without. However, as Gandhi said, we must be the change we want to see. We cannot count on others to deliver it for us. In a democracy, it must come bottom up as well as top down. I hope that, lifted by the prayers of billions around the world, in a few weeks' time, the United States, China, and forests will all be part of a new deal that is responsive to the needs of today, as well as responsible towards the interests of tomorrow. At her defining moment, Mrs. Thatcher famously said, "The lady's not for turning." 25 years ago, she was the first world leader to be convinced of the threat of climate change. Let's hope for more turning before the world decides to do the tipping for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Murray-Philipson. Very insightful presentation, and thank you also for the challenges that you place before us, very specific challenges, and the call to change. Thank you for sharing that. The next presentation will be given by Professor Mary Evelyn Tucker, who is a senior lecturer and senior scholar at Yale University, and her presentation is entitled "The Universe Story and an ecological future. Please join me in welcoming Professor Mary Evelyn Tucker.
Thank you, Your All Holiness, Your Eminences, ladies and gentlemen. We've been introducing ourselves today to one another, telling our stories, telling where we come from, why we're here, why we're connected to the symposium. This is a moment to tell our stories, our shared dreams of building a new kind of Earth community. What I want to share with you this morning is an attempt to weave our individual stories and our family narratives into alignment with the great narrative of universe emergence and unfolding. Just as history gives us a sense of our belonging to a people and a community and a nation, so now we recognize we need a narrative not just of human history, but of Earth history and universe history. We need an integrating story, as Thomas Berry says, a functional cosmology. We have at hand the remarkable opportunity to assemble into a story, open up the 4.5 billion years of Earth's unfolding of our living planet. We have biology and chemistry to show us the remarkable diversity of the life forms that have emerged from the first cell to multicellular flora and fauna, to open up to the wonder of the great diversity of life on our planet. Finally, we have the emerging fields of ecology and evolutionary biology, which are helping us to understand the remarkable interconnectedness of life systems. All of this is giving us a sense of the story of the evolution of life itself. So the film that I want to share with you today, a film in process, is a reflection of the integration of the sciences with the humanities and religion. For we cannot just look at the Earth and the universe as something out there. The universe is also in here. We are the microcosm of the macrocosm, which is one of the many wonderful elements of Greek Orthodox theology. For we can see the Earth indeed as an icon of immense luminous energy that has complexified over time to become water, air, fire, earth, plants, animals, humans. Nowhere, as far as we know, have these conditions for life emerged, and we are beginning to understand this is not just a mechanistic process, this is a sacred life-generating process. So the hope is that as a new sense of reverence emerges for the vast evolutionary journey, so too will a sense of responsibility arise for the continuity of life. The future of life will be determined by our choices. Our hope is that those choices will be based on a profound and renewed sensibility shared by both science and religion, that we have and we live in a universe that evokes wonder and awe at the most primary level of human experience. With this shared sensibility, we may still be able to rediscover ourselves as participants in Earth's processes, restoring and renewing the face of the Earth. Thank you. Now I would like to share with you a selection from this film that we've been working on for quite a few years. It's really a 30-year project in many ways. It is a project still in process. It will consist of a film, a 10-part short video series with scientists talking about the various parts of evolution, a book, and a website. What you will see, however, has imprints like Getty images and so on. Those will be eventually changed. So a few of these things will be changed. The music may be changed as well. But most importantly, for our symposium and for the great generosity of the Greek church and Greeks as a whole, we filmed this on Samos as a crossroads of civilization where Pythagoras was born. This sense of science and spirituality coming together with these ancient thinkers and teachers. And Aristarchus as well was there, who was the first to realize that the earth revolved around the sun. So Samos is the microcosm for the macrocosm of this story told in one day on the island of Samos, the story, the journey of the universe. Thank you, and we're ready to watch the video now.
Imagine you are witnessing Earth's beauty for the first time. Imagine the vastness of Earth's home, the universe. How can we find a way to sink deeply into these immensities? To find a way of participating in the flourishing of life? This film is an invitation to a journey into grandeur. A journey into the grandeur of our living universe. We are the first generation to know that we are on a living planet, orbiting one of the trillions of stars, in one of the billions of galaxies, in an unfolding universe that is profoundly creative and interconnected. Just as the Milky Way is the universe in the form of a galaxy, and an orchid is the universe in the form of a flower, we are the universe in the form of a human. And every time we are drawn to reflect on the awesome beauty of the universe, we are actually the universe reflecting on itself. And this changes everything. All cultures have had stories about the universe, about the ultimate nature of things, and why we're here in the midst of all of this. But in the last several centuries, science has discovered an immense amount of knowledge about the universe, knowledge that was unattainable in earlier eras. So we are in the midst of giving birth to a new story, a story that arises out of this scientific knowledge, but a story that is also congruent with the most ancient wisdom in the various human cultures. This new story of an evolving universe provides fresh insights into the most ancient questions. Where do we come from? Why are we here? We're on the Greek island of Samos, just a mile off the coast of Turkey. We could tell the story of the universe anywhere, Each place would offer its own unique possibilities for the telling. But we chose Samos because it's one of the great crossroads of human history. Europeans, Asians, and Africans have all made their way here. And by telling the story on an island surrounded by the Mediterranean Sea, we will be reminded that we live on this shining planet, sailing through the great ocean of the universe. And there's another reason we have come to Samos, and that is because 2,600 years ago, Pythagoras was born here. Pythagoras, a mathematician and philosopher, was one of the first humans to realize that the harmonies and relationships in the universe could be given expression using numbers. The current of thought he generated led eventually to all of modern mathematical science. He was also a great teacher. In fact, legend has it that he invented the word philosophy, a love of wisdom. So we have returned to the origin of so much of our current scientific understanding. Perhaps here we will begin to discover some of the deeper meaning in science. And who am I? I'm Brian Swim, your storyteller. I descend in part from indigenous peoples of British Columbia. I'm someone who's been shaped by the mountains and forests of the Pacific Northwest. To deepen my understanding of nature, I explored science, earning a doctorate of mathematics from the University of Oregon for work in gravitational dynamics. My quest has been to draw on the work of scientists from around the planet who have brilliantly captured the structures of the cosmos, of Earth, and of life, and to draw all of this together into a comprehensive narrative of evolutionary time. But to understand the full meaning of these discoveries, we need to incorporate the disciplines found in the humanities, in philosophy, music, history, in religion and art. By combining the sciences with these other modes of perception, we began to enter an integral awareness of ourselves and of the universe. For some 30 years, I have been researching, writing, lecturing, always searching for a way to tell the full epic story of the universe. And now, here we are. We'll spend a day here on Samos. Before the clock strikes midnight, we will have recounted the great events of our 14 billion-year cosmic evolution. Our immense journey, told in a single day on one of Earth's magical islands. Its planets, our solar system. In pondering the source of the sun's power, we can now reflect on something no earlier humans could know. The sun is converting 4 million tons of its mass into energy every second. Second by second, 4 million tons of the sun is transformed into light. This is the heart of the sacrificial processes that pervade the universe. All of life feeds on the roaring energy of the sun. Our solar system then is a self-energizing womb of creativity. And all of this had its start in a cloud of dust. Here we are, this amazing Greek island, and they're basking in the light from the sun. But it wasn't always like this. There was a time when neither existed. It was just a cloud floating through space that imploded, and then in the center, our sun grew forth, and then swirling around the sun there again as they were sweeping around the sun. And finally, all of this process led to our planets. It was really difficult for humans to realize that we live on a planet circling a star. I mean, we were here for hundreds of thousands of years before Aristarchus, 2,000 years ago, right here on Samos, realized we are spinning around the sun. That was such an amazing insight that it vanished, actually. And it wasn't until Copernicus discovered it in the 1500s that humans really began to absorb the fact that we are on this planet. So the discovery of the planetary nature of our existence is a huge one. Now, in the 20th century, we began to realize what the planets were made of and how they came into being. Let me use these vegetables to explain our solar system. So here we have the sun, this cabbage as the sun. Now, actually, if this were to be in scale, this cabbage would have to be 1 million times the size of this pepper. Budgetary considerations made that impossible, so you just have to use your imagination. Now, what we've learned in the 20th century is about the composition of the planets. First, we have the large planets. So we have Jupiter here, and we have Saturn and Uranus and Neptune. These are large enough to hold on to all the lighter elements so that they actually are gaseous. Too small to be a star, but yet too large to be solid. The other kind, then, we have indicated here with these rocks. So we have Mercury, then we have Venus, then we jump over to Mars. These are the rocky planets, most of which are solid. But there's one special rocky planet. One that's not too small and not too big. One that's not too hot and not too cold. One that's not exactly solid, but not exactly liquid. We call it home. Earth's story is unique. Planets smaller than Earth become rock solid. Those that are larger remain fluid and gaseous. But Earth avoids going into any fixed state like this. Earth is very much like an egg. The core of the Earth is like the yolk, the mantle of the Earth is like the egg white, and the crust of the Earth is like the egg shell. What happens is that early on, when the Earth is in a molten state, all of the really heavy elements like iron and nickel sink into the core. And then the elements like magnesium form this outer layer around the core, the mantle. The crust is only 10 to 50 miles thick, and that's the only solid part of Earth. All the rest is in motion. Mars is very different. Mars is solid all the way to its core. There's no movement like that at all. And of course, Jupiter is very different. It's all movement. There's nothing solid. But Earth lives between those two extremes. Plumes of molten rock will rise up from the mantle and harden into plates that form the crust. As these plates slide around the surface of Earth, they collide and crumple into majestic mountain ranges. Or they are forced back down, where they melt and sink toward the center of Earth. This discovery, which originated with Alfred Wegener, is called plate tectonics and is one of the greatest of history. While Einstein's theory enabled us to understand the entire universe as an expanding energy event, and Darwin enabled us to realize that life is one interconnected evolution, Wegener's work showed how Earth's great convection cycles of rising and sinking matter provide an ongoing regeneration of its surface materials. Several thousand minerals were created, and gases were spewed forth, some of which cooled to become liquids. Earth became encircled by great tidal oceans and held by a thin layer of atmosphere. With this double embrace of oceans and atmosphere, a churning, volcanic Earth could now bring forth the next wonder of existence, the living cell. Humans were gaining control of Earth's processes. And to what purpose? To create a better world, to eliminate hunger, to provide for our children, to have fun. And to fulfill this dream, we poured forth all of our energies, all of our technologies, and with stupendous results. In the blink of an eye, we exploded to more than 6 billion humans. But the irony of it all, housing and feeding this many humans has already gutted our oceans and forests. We've ended up achieving something like the opposite of what we dreamt of. It's not just that we're using up all the energies of Earth. It's much deeper than that. We're changing life's dynamics, and in an irreversible way. We're just beginning to realize that over the last few decades, we have profoundly altered the evolutionary dynamics of Earth. The air, the climate, the rivers, the oceans, even the DNA. We live on a different planet now, a planet where not biology but symbolic consciousness is the determining factor for evolution. This great reversal has taken place. In the far distant past, life drew forth symbolic consciousness. But now symbolic consciousness has seized control of life. With our languages and our machines, we have become as powerful as the planet itself. Because of us, ice caps are melting. Because of us, coral reefs the size of mountains are bleaching white. But nothing shows this disaster more clearly than life itself. Because of us, 20,000 species are going extinct each year. Nothing this devastating has taken place on Earth since the time of the dinosaurs, 65 million years ago. We are faced with a challenge no previous humans even contemplated. How are we to use this symbolic consciousness to create a culture that will enhance the Earth community for the next million years? You know that moment when you wake up from a disturbing dream and you try to pinch yourself and then you realize you're inside another dream? We're living in such a moment. We're in between dreams. The old dream that Earth is nothing but a resource bin is still driving most of the action, but it's losing its hold on our imaginations. It's losing its grip in part because the science that supported it is no longer viable. Our modern industrial world was built with the conviction that nature was devoid of feeling. For example, René Descartes, the father of modern philosophy, taught that when animals made crying sounds, they were not suffering. They were simply malfunctioning machines. Such a worldview in which only humans have sentient feelings allowed all of nature to become nothing more than a resource we could exploit in any way we wished. With the discovery of cosmic evolution, we now know that that the human and the natural world are profoundly interwoven, and in ways that are astounding to contemplate. For example, after our careful study of fish, we discovered, to our amazement, that fish and their ancestors had invented the nervous systems we were using to examine them. So we were a further development of fish, reflecting on the development of fish. An even more massive surprise awaited us in our study of the universe as a whole, when we learned that the expansion of the entire universe was just what it had to be in order for us to emerge. We began to realize how deeply at home we are in the universe. The body of the universe gave birth to our bodies. The self-organizing dynamics of the universe gave birth to our minds. We belong here. We've always belonged here. These deep discoveries of science are leading to a new story of the universe. It's a story that can be summarized in a single sentence. Over the course of 14 billion years, hydrogen gas transformed itself into mountains, butterflies, the music of Bach, and you and me. It's now midnight. As promised, we have journeyed through 14 billion years of the epic of the universe as we wandered about an island in the Mediterranean Sea. So now, what about the future? We are beginning to suspect that the universe is going somewhere. And just as the evolutionary process was intent upon bringing forth life, perhaps the universe now is unfolding towards some new destiny. Our deepest yearning is for a wholehearted participation in this flourishing. As we float in the midst of such mysterious immensities, is there any dark wisdom that might help us align our consciousness with the grain of cosmic evolution? Wonder will guide us. The human species has a genius for becoming astounded by almost anything in the universe. What can this mean? Consider the stars. We now know that stars, millions of times huger than Earth, exploded, and out of those elements, our bodies were assembled. We are stars burst into consciousness, and we arrived at this understanding by pursuing an ancient wonder at the stars. So wonder is not just another emotion. Wonder is a gateway through which the universe penetrates into us and carries us further into the adventure of knowing. By following our wonder, we are fulfilling our destiny. We are enabling the universe to come to know itself. We are awakening to the magnitude of the destruction we are bringing about, perhaps the worst in human history. Some are convinced the end of history is upon us, that our challenges are just too great, that failure is our fate. But as we wonder about our destiny, the universe is already igniting a deeper and transforming energy for the flourishing of life. Over billions of years, the universe has dealt with one cataclysm after another. That's the very nature of life's journey, to move forward on the edge of a knife. The same powers that brought forth the galaxies, the same powers that ignited the life in the first cells, are alive in us. If these powers succeeded so brilliantly in the past, we have reason to believe they will do so again, and they will do so through us, enabling us to bring forth a vibrant Earth community.
Professor Tucker, thank you very much for your comments and also for reminding us of the importance of the relationship between science and religion, and for that excellent film and presentation which really took us on the evolutionary journey. Thank you very, very much for sharing that with us. We really appreciate it. We do have some time now for questions, and I would ask you to use the microphones that are placed strategically in the room and to address your question to any of the participants, to any of those who have presented to us, or if you want to ask a question in general. And I'm not sure who the timekeeper is on this and how much time we have. I think we have about 20 minutes before we break for lunch. Any questions?
Is this on?
Yes.
This is for John Barry. In your presentation, you began with some excellent examples of technology being used to stop flooding. You also talked about the wetlands being very important. Are you looking for some way of removing some of the dams, for example, in the U.S.? And is your solution to the problem a combination of restored marshlands and some similar kinds of locks to prevent the water from coming in, or are you pushing more for a more restored natural environment with the marshlands?
Well, I think first I want to commend the other panelists for some eloquent presentations. I felt kind of pedestrian as I was watching them. You know, I sit here dealing with some very real concrete problems. And in fact, I'm a member of the levee board here in New Orleans and also on the State Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. In fact, there's a meeting in Baton Rouge today, but I'm here instead. You know, number one, there's absolutely no question that it's not just wetlands, it's land. You know, some of the land that has disappeared is every bit as solid as what this hotel is built on. It's not just marsh. You know, there is not enough, that needs to be, first, the loss has to be stopped. You know, there is not enough sediment in the river to rebuild what is gone. That's gone. There is probably, we hope, enough sediment in the river, although some people dispute it, to basically hold what we've got and rebuild land in certain critical areas where there are populations that are particularly vulnerable and sort of fill in some gaps. That absolutely has to be done to protect South Louisiana. I do not think that levees, you know, need to come down, and you'd have to look at a specific place and, you know, ask a specific question about that geography, you know, where levees should or shouldn't be built. I do think, in terms of tearing dams down elsewhere in the United States, those 6 dams that I refer to, you know, all the sediment that used to come through those dams down here is silting up those reservoirs. So it's creating problems for them up there. None of these are in, I'm not prepared right now because I haven't really thought through it to sit here and say, let's tear down those dams. You know, it's a complex issue. They do produce electricity. They do produce, you know, benefits in terms of irrigation and also flood protection in a vast, vast area. So all these things are trade-offs. The real thing that, you know, I hope people would take from a presentation like mine is that this is very clearly an integrated system, as I said in my remarks, and that the national interest is clearly in protecting this area, but people have to recognize that when someone switches on a light in Montana, they are directly endangering Louisiana. There is a real connection there. And I don't think people around the country understand that. In terms of the rest of the world, as I said, this is a model. I mean, there are many areas in the world where land is disappearing, In most cases, there's some kind of combination of events similar to what's occurring here. And I saw, oddly enough, I happened to deal in the world of influenza, and a scientist trying, and the natural reservoir for influenza viruses is waterfowl. All influenza is actually bird flu. And someone trying to track waterfowl actually discovered, I hate to put this number out there because I don't recall if it's accurate, but it was an unbelievably high number, maybe as high as 30% of the wetlands in China disappeared in a period of 20 years. And most of that was drained for development, as opposed to, what's happened down here where it's just washed into the sea. So in Egypt, plenty of land has disappeared because of a dam built 40 years ago, and that was part of the Cold War struggle. So in that sense, it's not unique. Whatever solution we come to here, assuming we come to a solution, as I said, that is going to be a model to be either emulated or avoided. And frankly, right now, I don't know that I'm certainly not optimistic. I'm not sure that I'm pessimistic yet. But I have not yet seen a sign from the national government that they recognize this is really a problem that needs an investment. And I think I may have filibustered that answer, so sorry I took so long in it.
May I add to that? And I'm not a scientific authority and certainly am honored to sit at this table. But I'd like to tell you what's happened in the political will of this region, not just this city, due to Katrina and due to for the last 20 years that I have been in public service watching the climate change. And because of Katrina, knowing we had to go more globally to understand what to do for just ourselves and integrate with the rest of the world. So we have been relying much upon the Dutch, the Netherlands, Copenhagen, and upon the city of Rotterdam, of which we are going to become sister cities, and trying to emulate some of their ideas as well as they are trying to emulate some of ours. But the one thing that has come from this is we are beginning to understand from a mentality of citizens that we can't run from water. We must learn to manage water. And that's a huge philosophical change for the mentality of the citizens of a 300-year-old community. So that in itself is a change that will put a lot of optimism into the future. The more specific things that we are tangibly doing is thanks to gentlemen like Mr. Barry and King Milling that you will meet on Sunday, and many others in this region, but those two are certainly two of our leaders. We have our Coastal Restoration and Protection Agency, our Coastal Protection and Restoration Agency, CIPRA, which is leading a unified approach through all of South Louisiana that combines the local governments of every one of our parishes, as we call counties, and our state government onto our federal delegation with the same, in one master plan, that we will create diversions that are sensitive to the maritime industry, but still allow for the rebuilding of coastal wetlands. That's a huge breakthrough in this region. Huge. Just for us to be aware of it is amazing. In my lifetime, I've seen, having been a blue water fisherman, as they call it, having been out in the Gulf to do deep sea fishing all my life, as a child, I saw volumes and volumes of what looked like land. And a lot of it was land, as Mr. Barry said, and wetlands for sure. We had major hurricanes in the 40s and 50s, but we had coastal barriers that protected us, and those were the wetlands. But now, in the 90s and the 2000s, we have watched vacant tributaries come right up into our major waterways where we have no protection. So we are now, from a mentality standpoint, approaching the concept that we have to create the diversions that will restore and rebuild these wetlands, but we must be in consideration of the maritime industry because we are a major port in the United States of America. To balance those two is part of what I think you're doing here, All Holiness, is bringing this balance to the whole world, and where we have to start noticing the changes we can make and prepare for more climate. And this has been brought about by climate changes and will be worse before it's better. And so I can say optimistically with Mr. Barry that we, from a political will standpoint, are now approaching a more positive stand and a more united front called prevention.
Of course, we don't have the money, and the money has to come from somewhere else.
It will.
Well, let's hope so.
Okay, thank you. The gentleman here.
My question is also for Mr. Barry, and it goes to part of what Ms. Clarkson was talking about. You mentioned that a lot of the founding of the city has to do with the maritime industry, and certainly that's what brought the first Orthodox residents of the city here. So I would like some of your thoughts on how we could find a balance between something that could be such a powerful agent for economic development, especially in light of the enlargements of the Panama Canal, and also preserving the environment. Thank you.
Well, actually, that part I don't think is that hard. The hard part is getting the money from Washington. I think that, you know, there are some people after Katrina, in 1900, Galveston, Texas was the biggest city in Texas. Everybody thought it was going to be the next great city in the United States. A hurricane came along and wiped that city out, and they built a 30-mile ship channel to Houston. Houston became Houston. Galveston is Galveston. After Katrina, there was the idea, a lot of people on both left and right thought, well, why don't we just move the port to Baton Rouge, which is, you know, on relatively high ground. It is high ground, a lot of it. Well, they don't understand that the port is essentially a continuous stretch of wharf that runs for 75 or 80 miles. You can't move that to Baton Rouge. It just extends almost continuously from there down below the city. I think if you remember the slide with all the red, and when I, you know, used the laser and pointed to the areas where levees protected no people, they only protected navigation interests. That is not a sustainable situation for the navigation industry. You know, they can keep that up for a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades maybe, but eventually that land will disappear, the river will disappear, and the shipping channel will disappear. You know, I think, so they should recognize, and I think many of them do recognize, that they need to get together and we come up with a technical solution. It's an engineering question more than anything else, that and a financial question. You know, the reason I keep coming back to money is, you know, it has to come from the federal government. We do not have the resources down here, and it not only benefits the national interest, but it's a moral responsibility because things done not just elsewhere in the United States, such as there are other issues involved, but I use the dams in Montana, North Dakota, and South Dakota because most people don't understand their impact. You know, those things directly damage us. So there's the moral issue, which certainly in this audience is relevant, as well as it is in the interest of the United States to do this down here. Probably the least sentimental politician in America is Newt Gingrich, who, as you all know, is also a conservative. And after Katrina, since we were getting a lot of criticisms and opposition from the conservatives, I've known Newt for a while, I went to him and asked for some help. And as soon as I explained the situation to him, he instantly got that it was in the national interest to protect the city, and did in fact help us and is continuing to help us.
Thank you. Gentleman over here.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm Stephen Schneider, and I'm a climate environmental scientist from Stanford University. And I first wanted to thank the panel for reminding us of an old cliche in ecology, which is that in nature you can't change just one thing. You introduce a species to control, and then you get 17 unexpected side effects. Well, that's true in spades when you have a coupled human natural system, which is what you're talking about down here. But I have a question for John Barry, and I also appreciated your reminding us of a slightly less nice cliche, which is that we've been building our economy by robbing Peter to pay Paul. So in the process of building financial resources, we've been draining natural resources and treating them as if they were free. And you pointed out that that's been part of it in connection with the shipping industry. I was just going to add, because you didn't mention another thing that I've heard a lot of people talk about for a whole different industry, which is the fossil fuel industry, which is the pumping of oil and gas causing subsidence to the land, making an artificial raise of sea level, which is actually larger than the climate-induced ones so far, and that the problem is we have to take a look at back to the first part of what all of you were talking about, the overall enterprise, and ask if what we've done to achieve improved quality of life is in fact now degrading it beyond the benefits from using the old traditional ways.
I mean, I did mention it, but failed to identify the oil industry. And as I left, I'm thinking, why did I mention oil? When I was talking about all the 10,000 plus miles of canals and pipelines dredged through the marsh, which act like an ice pick and create an urgent situation in what otherwise would have been a slow motion problem. Those canals were dug by the oil industry. And in fact, well, yeah. So I agree with you that they are a major contributor to the problem. And I think, frankly, that they recognize it at this point. No one was thinking about this 50 years ago, and the overwhelming majority of the land loss is occurred in post World War II. I think the question on subsidence is one currently under debate in the scientific community as to whether or not the actual extraction has created subsidence. But certainly subsidence, there are some people who think the subsidence is an entirely natural event that is beyond our control, or a lot, not all of it, but a lot of the subsidence is. And, frankly, we don't know. We hope that's not the case, because if it is, we're in trouble. I do want to make one comment, which I left out, about sea level. It is a myth that New Orleans is a majority of it's below sea level. The latest data is actually that slightly over half the city is at or above sea level. But sea level needs to be put into context. A third of Tokyo is below sea level. If you've ever flown to Amsterdam, you've landed at an airport that is lower than any point in New Orleans. Shanghai, the land is sinking so fast, you can almost watch it fall. If you have a port anywhere in the world, you're starting at sea level, a seaport anyway. And as you drain almost any, an area that's built on a rock, that may not fall. But they have the greatest problems with sea level rise. But anyway, you're still there, so perhaps you want to follow up. I don't. No.
There's another question from a gentleman here.
Yes, a question and a few remarks. I'm Laurent Stefanini. I'm the French ambassador for the environment, so I'm more in international affairs. But I'm impressed by the map just behind you. And my question will be directed to Mrs. Clarkson, because she's in political affairs. She's in charge. We do push a lot in all international forums in the field of water, integrated water basin management. We do it. We try to help as well the South countries, in the Congo Basin, in the Mekong Basin. But we have an experience as France because we have put up some 40 years ago agencies, because we think that it's not possible to have only cities or regions or provinces to deal with the issue. We need to have an integrated basin management. It's a lot easier in France. We have 6 agencies like that, but the Loire Valley or the Rhône Valley or the Seine Valley, the Loire Valley, you have Orléans, the old Orléans on it, are a lot smaller than this terribly huge water basin of the Mississippi, and I understand New Orleans is at the very tip down, getting everything. So my question is, have you something above states, above city councils, trying to have a coordinated policy for the whole water basin, which is, as I see it, almost 1/2 of the territory of the United States? If I can add, we have put it into action, and the only way to get enough resources was to have specific taxation on the users of water. This is the only way to get enough money, and we think that it's important for the users to realize how important is the cost of what they have, because you have dams, you have, but you have also depollution, you have sanitation station to do, and it's a lot of money throughout the basin. So the only way was to have a specific taxation posed on users. So my 2 questions are, is there something starting to coordinate, and do you intend to have those kind of new financial mechanism, as we say, in the future? Thank you.
Well, sir, we've started, and thank you very much, we've started with a master plan. And as I said earlier, that by itself is revolutionary for us. And to be planning that much. A master plan that will include all of South Louisiana. And we have, since Katrina, coordinated on all of our approach to flood control and help from the federal government with the entire coastal America. From Texas to Florida, we have formed a coalition of the entire, because as Mr. Barry said, well, as goes one coast, will go the others. And as all of the speakers have noted, we're all in this world together. So post-Katrina, we have united as a 5-state coastal region in some respects, especially in our approach to the federal government. We've also united as a southern part of the state that's coastal and in relationship to the whole state in order to build this master plan for the rebuilding of coastal wetlands. We are attempting in those 2 different directions to secure proper funding, whether it be through our state or whether it for our part of the master plan, or whether it be through the 5 coastal states for that part of the plan, each of the states contributing, and then jointly going to the federal government and saying, as goes we, so goes all of thee, and we are going to have to provide funding in the future. We've become very astute in how we go to Congress, either as 5 parishes of Louisiana, 7 parishes of Louisiana, or 5 states of the coastal region. We no longer go as a single city or as a single person. That in itself is a major change. So we do have to, we are starting to open the door that says we do need federal help, federal money, in order to make allowances for the changes in America. Let's start with America, and ultimately the world. as the climate change becomes more prevalent to all of us. So yes, we have begun, but it's a very small beginning. As Mr. Barry says, he's not optimistic because it's a small beginning. I'm very optimistic because in my tenure of public service, I've never seen such a major breakthrough in a mentality of coordinating first our parishes and then now the multiple states. So I really think we're going to make headway. We certainly made international news, which will get us some notoriety. We're even approaching changing federal laws to deal with emergency response and Stafford Acts and such. We will, and I'm writing a book, and it's called Don't Send FEMA, and that in itself is going to be going to be revolutionary, I think, in terms of what we're doing. And that is not dealing with any of the coastal restoration or any of the climate change, but what it's dealing with is a change in mentality, as I said earlier, because we are going to have the Stafford Act change today, tomorrow. America would respond better to an invasion of one of your countries than it would to another disaster in our homeland. That's that's the federal laws we have to change. We have to treat our own people as though we're a foreign invasion in terms of emergency response. As that changes, I think the money will change. The trend of prevention will change. America will realize we're a national problem and part of an international solution.
If I can add very briefly, His All Holiness referred to the pollution in the river. That has created a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico of thousands of square miles, which is destroying maybe the world's greatest fishery, certainly one of the handful of greatest fisheries. And in addition, with there has been a state and federal working group on that issue for a long time, and very, very little has been done. And there are still people in the upper Midwest who deny that runoff for fertilizer has any impact on that. So you have interest against interest. Dollars are at stake in the real world. It's difficult. In terms of the flooding issue, the Gulf Coast, just in June, this administration created a new task force, which was down here. The chair of the task force has been down here. Her first trip was last week when the president came down, and she was back Monday on a previously scheduled event. We don't know how that's going to go. If the White House backs that group, they have the authority to crack some heads and bring the agencies together. But, this is discretionary, and government and how it works, and a lot of things at stake or involved.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, I'm Roger Gottlieb from Worcester Polytechnic Institute in Massachusetts. Mary Evelyn, the emphasis towards the end of the film on wonder as a motivation to connect us to the larger universe story and therefore to change our ways. As I think of the history of social or civilizational or cultural change over the last 300 or 400 years, I think of things like the creation of democracy, the end of colonialism, the rise of women's rights, the invention of the sort of social welfare society. Would you say that those also were partly motivated by wonder, or is the change that we're facing now so spectacularly different from those that we need a totally different motivation for the social changes needed?
Well, that's a wonderful question, and I think they're complementary. I think the Earth Charter gives a very good indication of beginning with the cosmological sensibility that Earth is our home. And then the three parts of the Charter are: we need ecological integrity, this kind of discussion of how we're going to rebuild systems and restore them. We need social and economic justice, which is something you've held up so wonderfully. And we need democracy, nonviolence, and peace. But I think what we're discovering is this is a continuity. These are interrelated. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very interesting to see the optimism and sobering realism of the scientist and the politician here, both of whose presentations are so helpful. But I truly think the question is, and the students that we teach at Yale, the missing link is the hope that the actions be they technical change or political force, that these actions are going to result in long-term restoration. And this is where it's restoration of the human spirit and restoration of the earth. So I see this as a continuity. And I'm very, very pleased and thankful for your presence here and for my colleague Hylton as well, because it's inspiration and perspiration, I think, that we need. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And please join me in thanking all the members of our panel. We will now break for lunch, and we convene at 4 o'clock in this room for the afternoon session, Can Religion Help Save the Planet? And once again, thanks to His All Holiness for gathering us together.